So on slide 18, we are again taking a look at what's missing in latent transition analysis. And we talked about the statistical perspective. We're still within single indicator per time point in that situation. Now we're turning to the substantive perspective, and we're going to talk about trait theory and psychology and between subject differences that are stable over time. Here's an interesting model. If you just look at the picture first without concerning yourself with the interpretation of the variables, it looks like the Altman model for hidden Markov modeling with a random intercept up here, because we have these variables S1, S2, S3, S4, for S5, which looks like the latent class variables and transitions between them over time. But in this case, we have continuous variables throughout. So Y, the observed variables, are continuous, T is continuous, and the S variables are continuous. So this is a model that was brought forward by David Kenny and Zotra in 1995, the trait state error model. So T here represents a continuous latent trait variable. So something that influences the variables at all time points. So one quantity influencing the variables at all time points. So it sounds very much like a random intercept. The S1 through S5 represents a continuous latent state variable, so something that is not as stable as T, but varies across time. And we have then also measurement errors in each of the Y variables here. So it's a model that is actually quite interesting because it has more circles, more latent variables than observed variables. You may also contrast it with the logistic regression model, two-level model that we looked at, where we had x's down here instead. But in that case, we did not have any relationship between the x's. Just to describe and think about the visual aspects of the modeling. Now, in terms of what the model means here, it's very important that this trait variable influences the Y variables and not the S variables. So each Y variable is influenced by the trait and by the state and a measurement error. So the state variable then is not a measurement error and not a trait. It's something different than those two, something uncorrelated with those two, which means that this is a trait-free and measurement error-free variable, and it's that variable that we're interested in changes over time of. And these are standard linear regression. So the S variables are therefore free of the T, of the trait influence, and free of the measurement error influence. And that's a key aspect here, the fact that T does not influence the S's, but influence the Y's. And what then remains of the Y's is the S, apart from the measurement error. It's a very interesting model. So slide 20 then, there's some literature, reading suggestions here. Cole had a 2005 Psych Methods article on extensions of this model for multiple indicators. And Kenny and Zotra came back in the edited book from 2001, New Methods for the Analysis of Change, where he called his models the STARTS model. An application by Wagner here in Journal of Personality, Self-Esteem, Mostly Stable. So it has a big trait component in young adulthood. And then we have a Lütke article in Psych Methods, where he recognizes that this STARTS model can have computational difficulties perhaps due to this high ratio of latent to observed variables. And he is proposing here a Bayesian approach using MCMC techniques to have a little bit better result using in the estimation of the parameters of this. Now on slide 21 we move to a situation where we talk about cross-lag panel modeling. So we have two processes going forward instead of just one as in Kenny and Zotra. X and Z influencing each other and with a autoregression for each variable and then residual correlations over time. Now, it's an interesting article by Hammacher and others in Psychological Methods where we have a critique of the cross-lag panel model laid out. And that standard cross-lag panel model is criticized on the grounds that, here we quote from the abstract, if stability of constructs is to some extent of a trait-like time-invariant nature, the autoregressive relationship of the CLPM failed to adequately account for this. The lag parameters that are obtained with the CLPM do not represent the actual within-person relationships over time. This may lead to erroneous conclusions. An alternative model separates the within process from stable between-person differences through the inclusion of a random intercept. So this is a little bit like separation in Kenny and Zotra's model, where T does not influence S directly, so the influence between the S's over time is free of trait influence. Here's how Hammacher and others draw their model. So we still have the Y variables and we have the Z variables going forward at 3 time points. And we introduce now 2 random intercepts, one random intercept Y for the Y variable and one random intercept Z for the Z variables. So you have then a bivariate random intercept model here and fixed coefficient 1 for the Y and for the Z influence on their variables. And then these circles then become free of random intercept influence. So because for each latent variable here, it influences the part of Y that is not the random intercept. So very much like the thinking of Kenny and Zotra in that way. So that the relationship between Y and Z over time, cross-lagged, is free of this random intercept influence. So the random intercept is then thought of in a multi-level fashion as a between-level variables. So you sort out the between-level variation of Y and the between-level variation of Z, and you can then look at the within-level relationships between Y and Z. So once again, it's a multi-level type of thinking, but presented then in a single-level wide format. So you have then Hammacher's article here and several Mplus scripts for that article on the website here. Scripts for the how to run the RICLPM, how to run a multiple indicator version of it, and other resources.